Let's start today in Ephesians chapter 6. All right, Ephesians chapter 6. One verse here that I want to use to kind of lay our foundation and our baseline for today's discussion. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." I want you to zero in on that first phrase. It says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Flesh and blood is people. And what Paul is reminding us of here is that God's people don't fight people. Right? It's not our job to judge other people. It's not our job to condemn other people. It's not my job to preach against people. However, there are ideas, there are ideologies, and there are philosophies that come from the darkness of this world that we ought to talk about. And sometimes when we talk about those ideas or ideologies or philosophies, it can feel a little bit like we're talking about people. And so I want to make that distinction really clear this morning, that I'm here this morning to talk about some ideas that I think are harmful for people. I'm not here to judge you, condemn you, or preach against you. I'm here to tell you the truth. Now, sometimes when somebody says something that you disagree with, it can feel personal, and I get that. And so I want you to hear that if I say something that maybe hurts a little bit or you're not sure about, please understand that I'm not saying that because I think less of you. I'm saying it because I think enough of you to tell you the truth. And if I knew something was not good for you, if I knew something was harmful for you, and I didn't tell you, that would be incredibly unloving and incredibly unkind. And if the reason I didn't tell you was because I was afraid of what you might think, that would also make me a coward. And I don't want to be any of those things. And so I want to point you to God today. All right? So let's start in Genesis chapter 1. We've started here every day of this series, so let's do it again. Genesis 1:27. It says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." I want you to pay attention to those words, him and them. Him is a singular word, right? And so the picture here is that God is creating a singular humanity, right? This is where God creates mankind. And then them is a plural word. And so the male and the female part of creation, that's plural. So in a very real sense, what Moses is doing in this verse is he's saying, look, there is this singularity of humanity in the sense that we are all equal before God. We're all of equal value to God. We are all created in the image of God. We share our createdness together. We are one humanity. But at creation, what God did is he took that one humanity and he divided it into male and female and nothing else. Now, this is not just some religious idea, right? This is actually a provable, verifiable, scientific reality. If we look at genetics, we understand that genetics allows us to sort all of humanity into two categories, right? We have these chromosomes, and our chromosomes identify which category we get sorted into, either male or female. Biology allows us to do the same thing because all of us have biological organs by which we can identify whether we're male or female. We have external and internal organs. So my wife has body parts that I don't have, and I have body parts that she doesn't have. And if we didn't know otherwise, that's how we would be able to identify which one of us is the male and which one of us is the female. Right? This is just basic level biology, that we have body parts that identify whether we're male or female. But there's one other piece of this passage that is provable, verifiable, scientific evidence. All right, and here it is. After God creates, it says, "And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." All right? Now, you don't have to be a Christian to understand the truth of this. You can be an atheist and this still makes sense to you. If the species is to continue on, we must be fruitful and multiply. Because all of us are going to die, we need to make more humans. And the only way we can do that is through the male female partnership. Right? Again, this is not just a religious idea. This is standard biology 101. Male and female together is the only way that we can reproduce. It's the only way we can be fruitful and multiply. And you may say, David, this is an odd place to start. You're saying stuff that everybody knows. And you know what? 10 to 15 years ago, that was true. This I don't mean that to be funny, but I mean, 10 to 15 years ago, this was common sense, and I probably wouldn't have even need to say any of that. But I think we all understand that something's changed, right? We all understand that some of the stuff that I just said, while it may seem obvious to you, doesn't seem obvious to everyone. And in fact, some of the things I just said will sound hateful to some people. How did we get here from where we were? I want to suggest to you there's three ideas that have infiltrated humanity and in some ways infected humanity that got us from there to here. Here's the first one. The first idea is that we know better than God. Now, this one starts all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 1 and 2, you have this perfect, ideal creation. Everything works the way it's supposed to work. Adam and Eve, they're together. They're happy. The two have become one. Everything is great. Genesis 3, Satan shows up, says to Eve, don't you know that you can be like God? Just eat this fruit. Eve says, I think I know better than God. So she and Adam together eat the fruit, and evil enters the world. So because Adam and Eve believed they knew better than God, evil came into the world. And as a result of evil entering the world, the ideal creation of Genesis 1 and 2 was completely lost. And creation is no longer perfect and it's no longer ideal. Now we're at odds with each other. Adam and Eve were at odds with each other. Adam and Eve were at odds with God. Adam and Eve were at odds with nature. And if you really want to understand how quickly everything got broken, you only need to go to Genesis 4, where they have two babies that are born and one of them kills the other one. Because immediately humanity was broken. And because we live in a Genesis 3 world and not a Genesis 1 and 2 world, that means that a lot of times we deal with confusion about things that didn't used to be confusing. And we deal with a lack of certainty about things that used to be certain. In fact, this is true about us genetically. I just said, genetically we can sort male and female because we have these chromosomes that help us do that. But the reality is that in a Genesis 3 world, it doesn't always work that way. In a Genesis 3 world, there are some people who are born whose chromosomes don't naturally align with everybody else's. There are these things called Klinefelter syndrome or Turner syndrome, where a male or a female has an extra or is missing a chromosome. And so there's all of a sudden this little bit of a gray area as to where do we sort this person. And biologically, sometimes there's a lack of clarity. Most of the time when a baby's born, the doctor goes, boy or girl, right? They know right away. But there are times when the body parts, the biological organs that we use to sort aren't as clear. There's a little bit of ambiguity. And we're not quite sure, do we sort this male or do we sort this person female? And that brings us to the second idea that has really infiltrated humanity. The first idea is that we know better than God. As a result of that idea, everything got broken and nothing is as how it's supposed to be. The second idea is a lack of certainty equals a lack of truth. So there's this idea that because we can't be certain about everything, therefore we can't be certain about anything. Now this idea plays itself in a lot of other areas. Religion is one of them. There are a lot of people out there who look at the Bible, they look at God, and they say, I can't be certain about everything about Christianity. I have questions, and so I'm just going to leave the faith. If I can't be certain about everything, that must mean I can't be certain about anything. No, we don't really actually live our lives this way. Today, after church is over, I'm going to drive home. I don't know on my drive home if the other people who are driving are good drivers or bad drivers. Now, I'm in Ohio, so that tells me something. All right? But I don't know if they've got driver's licenses. I don't know if they've been to driving school. I don't know if they're inebriated. I don't know any of those things. There is a certain lack of certainty that I have about driving home. But you know what I'm still going to do? I'm going to drive home because Even though I don't know everything, I still know enough that the statistics tell me, the rules of the road tell me I'm probably going to be safe driving home. Lack of certainty in a little area doesn't mean I have lack of certainty everywhere. But what's happened in our world in recent times is that we say, well, there is this lack of certainty about gender and about sexuality. Like there is this group of people who they are the exceptions to the rule. They are the variants. And because we can't be certain about that, that probably means we can't be certain about anything. And so all of a sudden, instead of us saying, well, we generally know scientifically, genetically, biologically, we know that we are sorted male and female. That seems to be the standard knowledge. It's verifiable. It's provable. But this second idea that's infiltrated and affected humanity is if you don't have certainty everywhere, you can't have certainty anywhere. And that leads us into the third idea, which is probably the most harmful idea, is that we reject truth for our feelings and our self-knowledge. Well, what happens is in a world where I say, well, I can't be certain of everything, therefore I'm not certain of anything, now the only way I can know something is true is if I feel it or if I know it for myself. And so all of a sudden we've taken truth that's verifiable and provable, and we've diminished it so that we can elevate our own feelings and emotions and our own knowledge that we think we have as the source of truth. And this is dangerous. In fact, the Bible actually warns us about this. Jeremiah 17 says that the heart is what? Deceptively wicked. Our heart, our emotions, our feelings, they will deceive us. Have you ever been deceived by your feelings? Proverbs 3, Solomon's writing to his sons, and he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. He's saying to his sons, don't trust your own thinking. Don't trust your own mind. Your mind is not always trustworthy. There are times when you think something is true and you discover later that it is not true. Right? There are times when you may look around and say, well, that person doesn't like me. I know that person doesn't like me. I know I can't accomplish that. I know that's not going to happen. I know I'm not going to finish that. And you are absolutely convinced in your own mind that you know this, only to discover later, I was wrong. That wasn't true. This is actually the plot line of every Hallmark movie ever made, right? So like, city girl or city guy has to go into some rural small town and they feel awful about it. They feel angry. They feel nervous. They don't want to go there, and they are 100% certain. They know they aren't going to like anybody. They aren't going to like the way of life. They're going to have a miserable time. They feel bad and they know it's going to be terrible. And then they meet that special person, everything changes, and they realize that their feelings had led them astray, and what they thought they knew wasn't true at all. You see, here's the reality. What I feel about myself is less than what I know about myself, right? There are times I feel things about myself, and then later I'm like, oh, I was wrong about that. So what I feel about myself is less than what I know about myself, and what I know about myself is less than what is true about myself. And I have to be careful that I don't fall into this trap of being led by my feelings, by my emotions, by the things I think I know to be true, and build my life on something that's false. But when we talk about this question of gender, we live in a world today that has swallowed those three ideas whole. Idea number one, I know better than God. Idea number two, if I can't be certain about everything, I can't be certain about anything. And idea number three, my feelings and what I know about myself is more important than what is verifiably true about me. If you do a quick Google search and just ask Google a question, like, what is gender identity? Right? Go to ChatGPT to really get the absolute rock hard truth, right? Maybe not. But if you just ask Google a question like that, you're going to come back with a lot of answers. You can go to a lot of different sources. So this week I did that. I looked at ChatGPT because that gives us an idea of what most people are thinking, right? I looked at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I looked at NPR, all right? And then I looked at Portland.gov because we have a massive following in Portland. I don't know if you knew that. Our church does. It's my kids. Hi, guys. But as I went to these different sources of what is gender identity, here's what gender identity is. It's a person's internal understanding and perception of their own gender. It's each person's internal and individual experience. It's one's own internal sense. It's one's innermost. Are you seeing the pattern here? Everything is rooted on what's inside of me. Everything is rooted on how I feel, what I think about myself. None of it is based on anything that is verifiable or provable. Not genetically, not biologically, not scientifically. It's all internal. What do I feel? What do I do? So here's the problem then. Now we have people who look in the mirror, and what they see in the mirror is very different than what they feel inside. And they don't know what to do about that. And so what the world says to them is, if your mind is at war with your body, then change your body and your mind will come into alignment. Now think through what's beneath this philosophy, what's beneath this ideology. What they're being told is, you can trust your mind, you can trust your feelings, but you can't trust what you see. You can trust your emotions, but you can't trust what is verifiable or what is provable. And so they elevate feelings and emotions over what is verifiable and provable. But here's the problem. We don't do this anywhere else. Right? If someone goes to the doctor and the doctor determines that they have cancer, they say, Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to tell you, you have cancer. And if Mr. Smith says, well, doctor, that's strange because I feel fine. The doctor does not say, oh, you do? Okay, then. We won't worry about it. If you feel fine, you must be fine. Let's trust your feelings over what we can see. If a young girl goes to the doctor for bulimia or anorexia and says, doctor, I feel so overweight. I feel like I'm just huge. I feel like I'm morbidly obese. The doctor does not say, oh, if that's how you feel, here's some diet pills. Right? Or if that's how you feel, let's do a gastric bypass. Let's get this fixed. No, actually, I did do some real research this week, and I went and looked at some medical journals trying to discover what is the treatment that most doctors use for eating disorders. And listen to what some of the treatments are. Psychotherapy, counseling, medication for mental health, interventions, therapy. Do you see this? They're treating the mind. They're saying, you know what? We can see the truth in your body, that you are not morbidly obese, that you are not overweight, that you actually need to eat a sandwich. And so we're not going to change your body, we are going to change your mind. Now listen. I want to be very careful here because I don't want us to miss the fact that this is a very real struggle for many people. Okay? This is not something that is easy. There is no one who chooses to live their life with their mind being at war with their body. And there are some people who, for the entirety of their life, they have struggled with looking in the mirror and feeling like what they see is very different than what they feel. But the solution cannot be based on what can't be trusted. We cannot tell people to build their lives on their emotions or their feelings or what they think about themselves, because if you build your life on that, it's like building on the sand. When the storms of life comes, it collapses. There has to be a better answer. And there is. It's the answer that God gives us. Because God's answer, what he says to this problem, is change your mind and your body will come into alignment. Now, we're going to turn a little bit of a corner here in the sermon because I want you to hear that this is not just for a few people. This is actually for all of us. Because every single one of us has at some point in our life struggled with our mind and our body being out of alignment. The Apostle Paul did, right? He was a pretty good guy. And he wrote about this in Romans. He said, I do not do what I want to do, and the things I hate, I do. He's saying, look, my mind is telling me this is good for me, and so I don't do it. And my mind is telling me this is bad for me, and I do it. My mind and my body are at war within me. But Paul's solution was, I need to change my mind. Let me show you that. Romans chapter 12. Romans 12:1, Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies. So he's going to start with our bodies. See, look, all of us need to do something with our bodies. And when he's talking about our bodies, he's saying, look, this is your actions, this is your words, this is your thoughts. Every part of you that is bodily, this is what I'm talking about here. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. So Paul says, look, the ideal for all of us is that we present our bodies to God. That we live in a way that God is going to look at us, and he says, and he will see us as acceptable. He says, present your bodies as holy and acceptable to God. So the way I live, my actions, my words, my thoughts, my reactions, my relationships, all of that, I ought to live in a way that is acceptable to God. Now he says here the way you do that is by presenting your body as a living sacrifice, which would have been a weird term back then. Because remember, in the ancient world, a sacrifice was something you killed. So how can you have a living sacrifice? Now, what Paul is saying here is your whole body, your whole life is the sacrifice. You're going to go on living, but you're going to put to death the parts of you that are not acceptable to God. So as you live, whatever it is about your life, your words, your actions, your ideas, right, your reactions, your relationships, whatever it is that is not acceptable to God, you're going to put that to death. Now, in the next verse, he shows us how to do that. He says, do not be conformed to this world. Now, the word conformed means to change so you fit into the mold. Like, think of Play-Doh. You work the Play-Doh really good, then you stuff it into the shape, whatever you want it to be, and then when you take it out, it's in that shape. It's conformed to that mold. And what Paul is saying is, don't change your life so that you'll fit in with the world. Because if you fit with the world, you'll most likely not be acceptable to God. If you present your body as acceptable to God, you won't fit with the world. Because the world's mold and God's mold are radically different. So just think about the last 3 weeks. We've talked about marriage and divorce and sexuality. And think about how differently the world sees those things from how God sees them. God says that marriage is the foundation of society, right? It begins the family. Everything rises and falls on marriage. And he says, because of that, marriage is designed to be between one man and one woman who are committed to each other for life. That's God's perspective. And what the world says is, get married if you want, but you don't have to. It's really not that big a deal. In fact, it's kind of like the old ball and chain. So, try it out. If you don't like it, you can get out of it, which brings us into the world's idea of divorce, right? The world's idea is just get a divorce if it's more convenient. You don't like your spouse anymore, divorce them. You don't like the way they treat you, divorce them. You're not getting out of the marriage what you want, divorce them. Right? You see somebody else who might be better, divorce them. Right? You want to get a divorce anytime, anywhere, any place, for any reason. And God says, divorce is not part of my plan. Divorce is not something I ever want for you because divorce is not good for you. And so he gives really strict guardrails to say this is the only time it ought to happen and it only ought to be a last resort, never a first option. God's view of sexuality is that it is this great gift he gave to us by which we get connected to each other. That's how the two become one. But he said it's reserved for a man and a woman who are committed to each other and each other only for life. That's marriage. And outside of that, it can never be all that it was meant to be. And the world says sex? Yeah, sex is good for anybody, anytime, anywhere, for any reason, anyhow. Just go for it, right? If you want to, do it. Whatever feels good, go for it. Understand that your life cannot fit with the world and be acceptable to God. And so Paul says, don't be conformed to this world. Don't change yourself to fit in with the world's values. Instead, he says, be transformed. Transformed is this whole person change that begins inside and works its way out. It's like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And what Paul is saying is, you don't need to change yourself to fit with the world. Instead, you need to let God change you so you can be the person he created you to be. And the way you do that, he says, is how? By the renewal of your mind. Is the way you're living your life out of alignment with God's purposes? Is the way you're using your body unacceptable to him? The way you change that is by renewing your mind. Because you see, what I do with my body begins in my mind. And whatever it is that I fill my mind with eventually works its way out in my body. And so what Paul is saying is, stop filling your mind with the ideas, with the ideologies, with the philosophies of this world. Instead, begin filling your mind with God's truth, and let God's truth renew your mind so that you will be transformed so that you can live with your body in a way that is acceptable to God. And look what happens when we do that. It says, so that by testing, and by testing means as you live your life in different situations, you're going to see what happens here, so that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. God has a plan for you that is good, acceptable, and perfect. But you will never discover that plan if you're living in a way that is not acceptable to him. You will never discover that plan if your life is conformed to fit in with the world. You can only discover God's good, perfect plan for you if you're willing to let him transform you by the renewing of your mind. So that leads us to a really important question. Okay? Am I doing that? Is the way that I live my life today, do I live my life based on what feels good or feels right to me? Or am I living my life based on what feels good or feels right to the world? Or am I living my life based on what feels good or feels right to God? And I know the answer for all of us is sometimes, maybe not always. And all of us, if we look back into our past, we will say there have certainly been times when I've not hit that standard. There have certainly been times when I fall short. And here's the problem with that. When I fall short of what is acceptable to God, now I am on the opposite side of him. Paul talks about this in the book of 1 Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians 6. And sometimes this passage gets referred to as a hammer passage because it's been used by preachers and by Christians or people who claim to be Christians to really go after and attack, condemn, and judge those who are in same-sex relationships. That's not Paul's point in this passage. And I want to take you to this passage partly because I want you to see what Paul's point is, but also because it has a powerful truth for all of us. So Paul begins by saying, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? That makes sense, right? If you're not righteous, you don't get to spend eternity with God. But what he does next is he gives us a list of what it looks like to be unrighteous. So this is 1 Corinthians 6:9. He says, do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral will inherit the kingdom of God. So he starts with this big category, right? If you've ever done anything that is outside of God's plan for sexuality, then you're unrighteous, right? So whether it's an action or a thought or something you've watched, if you've done something outside of God's plan for sexuality, then you're unrighteous. Nor the idolaters. Idolatry is anytime we prioritize something over God. So it's anytime when my worship of God is distracted by something the world offers. So if there's ever been a point in your life when you've prioritized something ahead of God, then you're an idolater. Nor adulterers. This is a little more specific. It deals specifically with marriage and unfaithfulness. But remember also what Jesus said. Jesus said that if a man looks on a woman with lust in his heart, then he has already committed adultery with her. So it's more than just the actions. It's also the intentions, the desires, the thoughts. Nor men who practice homosexuality. This is one of those phrases that's very difficult to translate. And if you look at different versions of the Bible, they all translate it a little bit differently because it's not clear if Paul is actually putting two items into the list here or just one with two words that work together. And so another way to translate this, and this is kind of my rough translation, but it's super literal. All right, the super literal translation of this would be, nor soft men who sleep with each other. That's like as close to literal as you can get with the Greek. Soft men who sleep with each other. Nor thieves. Right? A thief is someone who takes what's not theirs. And we're not just talking about bank robbers here, right? Because you can steal things that aren't yours. You can take credit for an idea that wasn't yours. Right? You can steal someone else's credit. And if you take something that's not yours, guess what? You're on the list. Nor the greedy. It's not just about what you take, it's about what you want. If there's ever been a time in your life when you weren't content with what God had provided for you, you're on the list. Nor drunkards. So a drunkard is someone who's controlled by wine, and the concept here is that if you're controlled by any substance or if you're addicted to any substance, whether it be alcohol or drugs or caffeine, you're on the list. Nor revilers. These are violent people, right? People who are always looking for a fight. Maybe not a physical fight. Maybe it's a verbal fight or an emotional fight. They just run towards conflict because they love it. And if that's you, if you love to run into conflict, then you're on the list. Nor swindlers. Someone who takes something that they haven't earned. So if you maybe clock in for more hours than you actually work, then you're a swindler. Or if you're a boss and you underpay your employees because you're trying to save the business, then you're a swindler. And Paul says, none of these people, if you're on this list, none of these people will inherit the kingdom of God. And here's the reality. I'm on this list. You're on this list. We are all on this list. But Paul is not giving us this list because he wants to make us feel guilty or feel ashamed. He's not giving us this list so that he can judge us or condemn us. The reason he's giving us this list is because he wants to show us that God is a God who saves everyone. That there is no one outside the saving power of God. Look what he says next. He says, and such were some of you. Were is the key word there. Such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. You're on this list, but that doesn't have to be held against you. It says you were washed. That's a great word. It means to be made clean, right? To do away with someone. There's a very real sense in which it means to release something. In fact, Homer used this word in the Iliad, when he's talking about Achilles releasing Hector's body to Hector's family. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. A few of you grammar nuts do, or you English nuts, you know what I'm talking about here in the Iliad. But when he releases the body of Hector back to the family, he gives it up and it's gone. This is exactly what Paul is saying here, is that, look, if you give your life to Jesus, you are set free from whatever enslaves you. And so the desires of this list, the temptations of this list, if that has enslaved you, if that's held you captive, you've been set free of that. You simply need to embrace the freedom Jesus gives you. You've been washed clean. Also, you've been sanctified. To sanctify something is to set it apart for a special purpose. You see, God has a unique purpose for you. That's what Romans 12:2 said. His perfect and acceptable will, right? He's got a unique purpose for you. And if you're willing to set aside your earthly desires, then he will show you what you've been set aside for. And then finally, he says you're justified. Justified is a legal term. It means the judge declares you not guilty. And here in this passage, what it's saying is the ultimate judge, the righteous judge, God, he will declare you not guilty of your sins because of what Jesus has done for you. Now, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but if I kind of take all of the judgment passages of the New Testament and pull them together, so like Matthew 10, Matthew 25, Revelation 20, a few other ones, the picture that you get might look something like this. At the end for me, I have to stand before God and give an account for myself. And as I stand before the righteous judge, he will say to me, David, are you guilty of anything on that list? And the reason is because God will not allow sin into eternity. Right? Sin was allowed into this world and it destroyed it. It wrecked it. It broke it. But this world is just temporary. And because sin destroyed this world, God will not let sin destroy the next world. He will not allow sin into eternity. So if I have sin on my account, if I'm guilty of anything on that list, then I can't go into eternity with God. And so God, the righteous judge, will say to me, are you guilty of anything on that list? But before I can even speak, Jesus will step forward, say, wait a minute. He's mine. I've washed him clean. He's justified. And God, the righteous judge, will say, not guilty. Welcome to eternity. We have a really, really great picture of this in baptism, right? Because in baptism, the first thing we do is we put somebody under the water. And that's a picture that they have joined their life with Jesus. And so they're joining him in his death. Because while he died for them, they're dying to their sins. And then when we raise them up out of the water, that's a picture that they are still joined to Jesus in his resurrection. And so he is raising them to new life. And the reason we do this picture in water is because there's this beautiful image that when I join my life to Jesus, he washes my sins away. 1 John 1:9, if I confess my sins, he is faithful and just to forgive my sins and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness. Here's what that means. If I give myself to him, he takes all my sin from that list, right? Whether it's one sin or a life of sin, he takes all my sin from that list and he wipes it clean from my account. So I'm no longer guilty. I no longer need to be ashamed. I no longer need to live with regret. I don't need to fear the final judgment because he is mine and I am his. This is why Jesus said in Matthew 10, if you will acknowledge me before men, then I will acknowledge you before my heavenly Father. What's he talking about there? He's talking about the final judgment. When he steps forward and says, he's mine, I acknowledge him. And Jesus says, if I want him to do that for me, I have to acknowledge him before men. And that's what baptism is. Baptism is this acknowledgement that Jesus has saved me. It's a picture, it's symbolic. By the time I get in the water, Jesus has already saved me, but it's an acknowledgement to men that he's done that for me. And I sometimes wonder if one of the reasons we miss out on some of the power and the peace that God has promised us is because we've never taken this step of obedience, the step of baptism. See, there's some of you who are here this morning and maybe watching online that I would put into this category that I call churched but not changed. Like you've been coming to church for a while, maybe a long while, maybe your whole life. And even though you've been coming to church for your whole life, it hasn't changed you at all. I mean, you come here and you sing the songs and you might even put your hand up and you like the sermons and you think they're great, but then you go back to work on Monday and nothing looks different about you. your life has never changed. And sometimes you wonder, why don't I feel the power that they talk about at church? Why don't I feel the peace that they talk about at church? Why don't I feel the joy that they talk about at church? And the reason is because even though you've been showing up your whole life, you've never given yourself to Jesus. And maybe what you need to do today is say, it's time for me to start renewing my mind by giving myself over to him. And I need to take that first step of obedience. I need to acknowledge Jesus before men so that he will acknowledge me before the Father. Now, there's also some of you here this morning who are not in that category, but in a completely different category. You've never given yourself to Jesus, and you know it. You've been living life on your own. And there are times and there are moments when you feel overwhelmed with guilt and you feel overwhelmed with shame and regret and fear, and you're not 100% sure why, but the reason you're here today is because you're looking for answers. Jesus is that answer. If you will give your life to him, you will start a new journey. He will renew your mind. He will transform you. He will change you. He will bring your life into alignment with his good and perfect plan. But you have to give yourself to him. You can do it right now. While I'm talking, right now, you can acknowledge him in your mind. You can acknowledge him in your heart. Just say, Jesus, I've been messed up. I know that I've not lived up to your standards. I am on that list and I want off that list. So cleanse me from my sins. Give me the new life that you offer. And if you ask him for that, he will give it. And if that's you today, your next step is to get in the water, right? Come back next week and get baptized. Acknowledge before men what Jesus has done for you so that he will acknowledge you before his heavenly Father. I know this morning we've talked about a lot. And my guess is that some or maybe all of us have some thinking that we need to do. We need to chew on some of this. We need to ask ourselves, where am I out of alignment with what God wants for me? And maybe for some of us, it's even bigger. It's more difficult. Let me challenge you. If you need to stick around here and talk to God, I want you to do that today. Don't go running off until you make it right with him. If you need to pray with somebody else, come down here after we're done. Our prayer crew will be down here. They would love to pray with you. They would love to help you find that power and that peace and that joy that we talk about. And before I send you off, I want to take a minute and pray for you myself. So can I do that? Father,